Welcome to today's guest lecture of the Amsterdam Center for European Law and Governance. My name is Maria Weimer. I'm the acting director of the Amsterdam Center for European Law and Governance. And it is my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Alberto Alemanno. Although I will say that introducing you is also a bit of a challenge because you have a lot of academic and non-academic pursuits. And so to introduce you in a short and concise way is a challenge, and I'm going to try to do you justice, but I'm going to be selective. So let me start with Alberto's main academic affiliations. Alberto is Jean Monnet Professor of European Law at the Haute École de Commerce in Paris. He is also a permanent visiting professor at the University of Tokyo School of Public Policy and at the Collège d'Europe in Bruges. Alberto has worked in many fields of European law, including risk regulation, public health, food policy, democratic innovation, participatory and deliberative democracy, and is today one of the leading voices on the democratization of the European Union. But next to his academic pursuits, Alberto is also very passionate about public engagement and about bridging the gap between academia and public policy. One of the books he has written is titled Lobbying for Change, Find Your Voice to Create a Better Society, and it was written intentionally for a broader audience and was published in 2017. And another child of his heart is the startup The Good Lobby, a transnational initiative with a vision to equalize access to power by strengthening the advocacy capacity of civil society and making corporate political influence more accountable and sustainable. And for these pursuits as a social entrepreneur, Alberto has won several awards, including the Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2015 and Ashoka Fellow in 2019. Today's topic is that Alberto is going to introduce us to is no less ambitious and formidable, and it is how to make Europe a people's project. We are very happy to have you, Alberto, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria. Good to see you all. Thank you for the kind invitation. It's a great opportunity to spend a few words about the state of European democracy today with a very attentive and informed audience. So my job will be to provoke you a little bit so as to trigger as many questions as possible and then having a proper debate. So I will probably be speaking for approximately half an hour or so, and then we're going to have enough time for a question and answers, but I would say a debate. So I would be very keen on hearing your say on my provocations. The title of my presentation really tried to capture a long-term project of mine, which has always been around what is the role that citizens could or should play in European integration. That's very close to my heart, is very close to what I've been doing over the past 2 years, and I would like to contextualize this in the historical moment in which we are. We are 60 days away from the next European elections. A new policy cycle is about to start. And in order to get there, to land together, the questions I would like to ask you is a question I've been asking over the years, so some of you might already know the answer, but most of you might have never heard me asking this question. And the question I would like to make you think of is what Europeans never do together. If you had to identify one activity, one space, one area in which Europeans don't really engage together. In the old days, there were people saying taxation. Well, not really, right? When you pay any product or service in Europe, percentage of the VAT you pay goes directly into the European budget. So it's not about taxation, right? And even indirect taxation is somehow affected by the long case law of the court going there. Some people might say defense. Well, not really, right? We have been procuring arms to Ukraine. So even though the treaty does not necessarily allow them to do that, well, it is actually happening. But Europeans do a lot of things together, more and more. So what is the only thing that they never do? Anybody who would like to dare, right, to say what we don't? together? Anybody? Yeah. Sports? You say sports? Yes, yes. We don't have a European team of soccer. Europe is now playing against the US in the World Cup. Yeah, true. We don't have a European flag. But still, you know, when you look at any team in Europe of any sport, where are our citizens coming from all over? So some sports we do together. You play together, right, as Europeans. So this is not necessarily what I'm looking for as an answer. Anybody who would like to give it a try? Yes?
Elect our national leaders.
Elect. So we don't do politics, bingo, right? We don't do politics in Europe. Politics is something that remains very much pretty national. It's a national affair. So if you think about it, 60 days before the European elections, what is going to happen in 2 months' time? We're going to be voting on different dates, European elections, right? The Dutch are going to vote on Thursday, the Belgian on Friday. Most of Europeans are going to be voting on Saturday and Sunday, right? So we don't even vote for the European elections on the same day. We don't have a European political moment. We have many moments. And who are we going to vote? We're going to vote for national parties, right? We're not going to be voting for European parties. You're going to be voting for the usual suspects, the parties you already know. We're going to be voting for parties presenting national programs. They're not going to be saying us what they're going to do in Europe once elected. They're going to be talking about major domestic issues, and they're going to be presenting national candidates. The Dutch are going to be voting for Dutch candidates. There might be a few exceptions, perhaps Germans, people who might have learned Dutch in the meantime, who might be running, but there would be exceptions. So much for European politics. There's nothing European in it. Everything is very national. It's national in the rules of the game. It is national in the kind of profiles and issues they're going to be discussing. Political scientists have been defining the European elections as second-order elections, elections that come after the national elections. They have different kind of dynamics, from different expectations. They are a completely different ballgame. Why it is the case? Why politics is still a national affair as opposed to be a European affair, even when we select our representatives in Europe? Well, we don't have a European party system in Europe. We don't have a European political party competition. Everything is pretty domestic. If you think about these logos and you pick anybody in the street, if we walk out, how many citizens will be able to select and tell us what these parties are about? Because these European political parties are loose federations of ideologically heterogeneous national parties. They come together to get funding. They come together in groups once they are in the European Parliament, but they are not necessarily visible to us, because when you, in 60 days from now, are going to be called upon to cast your ballot box, you won't see those symbols, right? In the ballot box, you will see national symbol. You will see national parties, and you won't necessarily see, because it's not required by the law, which each national political party you're been voting for is linked to those European political parties. So you have a bunch of national parties running for the elections, getting their people invited in Strasbourg and in Brussels, who still didn't tell us, and they won't tell you, which is their European political party. Right? Are you with me? Or somebody would like to challenge that? Some national parties, on a voluntary basis, they decided to add on their national symbol a reference to these national political parties. But these are exceptions. It's clearly not required by the law, by the electoral law, and it's clearly not something you might expect to happen. That means that you find yourself in an interesting situation, right? The last but one government in the Netherlands fell because VVD and D66 had a disagreement. Well, how many people know in the Netherlands that these two parties belong to the same European political party and the same European political groups? Right? How many people know that when voting CDA in the Netherlands, they're actually voting Forza Italia in Italy, the Républicains, New Democracy in Greece, or CDU in Germany? Very few. Because this visibility is simply not assured by the system. How many people know that when voting for PIS in Poland, they're actually voting for Giorgia Meloni in Italy, or they're voting for Vox in Spain? Very few. Why? Because this information is simply not provided to us, and no national political leader is going to tell us which are her political affiliations in Europe. And many of those parties actually don't have a political affiliation in Europe. So say in the Netherlands, Peter Omtzigt, what is his European political affiliation? We don't know yet. He's a new party. He didn't get anybody elected yet. Which is his political affiliation? EPP, European Popular Party, like many people might expect, or he's going to go with the Liberal, or he's going to go with the Conservatives. And this might make a significant difference to get several people elected. And what about big parties? Parties are going to get a lot of people like Fidesz, Viktor Orban party. Where is MEPs are going to go? Well, they were pushed out from the EPP during the past legislature. Will they join ECR, meaning Giorgia Meloni, Vox, or they're going to go with Identity and Democracy, with Mr. Wilders, and with Marine Le Pen, and with Matteo Salvini? We simply don't know. We don't have this information. I think I made my point. Second point, there's not really a European public sphere. There's not really a pan-European conversation informing us about what's happening in Europe. If Mr. Rutte go to Strasbourg and gives a speech, well, Mr. Rutte's speech is going to be narrated through the lens of 27 nation states with their own media outlet telling us what Mr. Rutte said, right? We don't have pan-European narrative of what Mr. Rutte said. And the same applies to any other political leader, which of course creates further complexities in unpacking what is the European conversation if there are 27 national conversations tackling common challenges and common issues ranging from migration to post-COVID to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In this political moment, we simply don't have this conversation happening in those terms. So over the years, I've been arguing, like a few others, we are very few, that Europe hasn't really suffered from a democratic deficit. Everybody in Brussels, in Strasbourg, is either directly or indirectly elected, as some democratic legitimacy has been selected, not necessarily in an intelligible way, but it has been selected. But what the European Union suffers from, as I've been trying to argue, is a democratic, or better, an intelligibility deficit. So it is not intelligible, right? It is difficult to read. The system is difficult to read because the European democratic credentials are very different than democratic credentials in the nation state. Europe doesn't work like the nation state, but we read Europe as potentially a nation state or something that's working like a nation state. And over the years, I've also been arguing that this reason, this lack of intelligibility, is what is holding us back as Europe, as a political project that is expected to deliver on new expectations coming from citizens, and is a form of what Renaud Deus already 23 years ago defined as democracy without politics. Overall, the edifice is democratic, but is not necessarily political, because there's no space for having those political conversations because they are insulated from the transnational dimension. They all happen across jurisdictional lines, across nation states. And the difficult question for the average citizens, including myself, is who is accountable in this situation? Who is accountable for, give you examples, the sudden U-turn that it occurred 4 months ago when our President of the European Commission, representing the executive, is saying that, well, the Green New Deal, which was the new raison d'etre, that was the mission she had to accomplish, is no longer the priority of this European Commission. So different circumstances led her to basically make this U-turn and to even boycott, through her political party, the very same political priorities she pledged to deliver to the all European citizens who actually believed in that particular project. Who is accountable for the state of the rule of law in Europe, where several European countries, in particular Hungary, have been breaching in a systematic way the rule of law? They've been condemned by the European Court of Justice, but they never really comply with many of those judgments. Who is responsible for the political decision to eventually grant, disburse European funds to the Viktor Orban-led government in Hungary in order to have him lift a veto on the Ukrainian aid? This happened only a few months ago, right? Who is accountable for that? As you probably know, the European Parliament decided to lodge an action for annulment against the decision of the European Commission disbursing that funding. So there is a mechanism, apparently, that it will be used
in order to get the kind of accountability, but obviously this won't play out before the European elections. So in a way, this is gonna come just too late, right, to trigger political accountability. And who is accountable for a situation in which basically the European Commission decided together with European leaders, so it's a UCO decision to eventually endorse the Rwanda approach. So this idea of externalizing the security of our borders to third countries by basically paying funds to those countries, you know, EU-Turkey deal, and then of course we had many others. But if politics, European politics, is simply not there as we might expect, the Europeanization of society and the economy is clearly happening. So there is a major mismatch between our individual experiences of Europe, to different degrees, depending on how we live Europe, and the overall political conversation on Europe. So if I ask you how many European citizens do live in another European country, and I know there are many in this room, how many are we in percentage terms? What would you say? 5? You say 5? What do you say? Other figures? 2. You say 2?
3.
You say 3?
10.
You say 10? Okay, in the US, the interstate mobility is approximately 24-26%, to give you a sense. So 1 American out of 4 lives in a different state than the state in which he was born. In Europe, it's 3.6. So it's approximately 14 million people, right? And we discussed today over lunch that 95% of those people don't exercise their political rights. So they don't vote for the European Parliament, they don't vote for national elections, despite being, as you clearly know, entitled to do so. So very interesting question, we leave it for the Q&A. But if I ask you how many European citizens actually are exposed on a daily basis to Europe, meaning to another European country, because they have family, because they work, they go on holiday, well, that figure goes up to 50%, which is a good news, but it's also bad news, because the other 50% is simply not exposed to Europe. And we know that one of the original sins of the European integration is to put a very high reward to those citizens who actually are mobile, who move. If you are immobile, you don't necessarily experience Europe in the same way, right? You don't necessarily prompt all your entitlements. It is against this backdrop of mismatch between Europeanization of the social and the economic and the lack of Europeanization of the political that over time, at least since I would say the end of the 90s, European leaders, who change, as you probably know, quite often, decided to try to give it a chance, to Europeanize the political process. And the most significant change in the rules of the game is this provision, which has kind of been debated in the Brussels bubble, in academic literature, but not as much as you might expect. And basically that provision said that the European democratic model should look a bit more like the national one. We need to go towards a system in which the executive should be accountable to the parliament. So we go towards parliamentarization. And that provision says a few words, which are very hotly debated and discussed. It basically said that when the European elections are wrapped up, we have this aggregation of national elections, because that's what's happening, right? National elections, they produce this collective preference, they're gonna come together. All these MEPs who have been selected nationally become members of the European Parliament, becomes European, artificially, right? From one day to another. They didn't run on that campaign, they didn't talk about Europe, but they become European. On that day, the European leaders have to decide who is going to be the president of the European Commission by taking into account the outcome of the European elections. Those few words basically injected the idea that unless the European leaders take into account the likelihood of that candidate to go through the European Parliament, who has the last word on whether or not that person will become president of the European Commission, is going to pass. And last time, as you might remember, in 2019, the candidate put forward by the European leaders only got 8 votes of difference between those supporting her and those voting against her. In 2014, European political parties decided to take very seriously the treaty. It was the first time since the Lisbon Treaty that they had to somehow operationalized this. And they basically said, okay, each European political party, those you don't see in the ballot box, are going to say that if they are going to win those elections, meaning they're going to be the party that get most of the vote across Europe, their lead candidate, also called Spitzenkandidat, will become the President of the European Commission. Very easy in 2014, it goes pretty smoothly, went smoothly. Mr. Juncker, former Prime Minister of Luxembourg, as the lead candidate of the EPP, the European Popular Party, that got most of the vote, was automatically perceived as the right one. Actually, there were two countries who voted against, the UK and Hungary. Orban and David Cameron voted against, but all the others, they followed. So it just happened. It went through the parliament with a very high support. The so-called first European Political Commission. Fast forward to 2019, 5 years ago, and you see that the EPP selected a Spitzenkandidatin. You might remember Manfred Weber, who then became both the leader of the group and the party. The socialists picked Franz Timmermans, who doesn't need presentation in this country. The liberals didn't pick any candidate. The Greens did always a ticket to be gender balanced, and they always had two candidates. And the liberals didn't, and Fidesz didn't, the League didn't, so many European political groups didn't. How interesting. Some pro-European parties like the liberals decided not to go with the Spitzenkandidat, and they put forward 7 or 8 faces that were not very representative, and they basically team up with Viktor Orban and Matteo Salvini in boycotting the Spitzenkandidat. And a little agreement was made informally by European political parties that this time Spitzenkandidatin was not or would have not been automatic. That means that also Timmermans coming number 2 or Vestager coming number 3 might have a chance to be selected as President of the European Commission. So there's a difference. Automaticity in 2014, no automaticity in 2019. What happened then? You all know what happened then. European elections bring back the voters to show up. Highest turnout since 1976, the first time European voters were called upon to vote their representatives in the parliament. More than 1 citizen out of 2 in average, because in Central European countries, this wasn't the case, it was still very low. Countries like Slovakia, 16% of turnout. So this is an average. We know that the average are not representative, but this was the good news. But then we got a candidate who actually not only didn't run, not only was not here among the Spitzenkandidaten, but he was cherry-picked by the European leaders after many, many discussions. The candidate at the time, first public statement said, this is not going to happen again. The selection of top appointees has to be different. We need to work on this towards 2024. Next time is not going to happen. I was among those who defined this, the original sin of Ursula. I thought that this was not a good choice. Not necessarily because European citizens all knew what a Spitzenkandidatin was, but because the process itself had no accountability whatsoever. And the European Parliament was not able to flex the muscles and to say, we cannot buy this. We need to be heard. There should be an agreement between the Parliament and the Council in order to have a legitimate candidate. So the question I asked exactly 5 years ago was this one. Why European citizens should actually vote in 2024? And I think it was a legitimate question. What kind of channels of accountability we're going to create between casting your ballot box and the political color of the next European executive? And that question, I think, will remain unanswered. Today, we don't have an agreement. Juncker is the only real Spitzenkandidat because he's the only one who could claim to have a kind of political endorsement by European citizens. And as you might have heard if you read the news, only yesterday, Euronews came up with an incredible poll stars showing that 37 or 34% of European citizens, no, 63% of voters either view the Commission work negatively or have no opinion. So all of a sudden, we see a new reflex in the media in trying to check the popularity of a candidate running for the European Commission. Because we know by now that Ursula von der Leyen will be running as a Spitzenkandidat at the time, chosen by her own party, against other Spitzenkandidaten who are here. But is this process of lead candidate credible today? I think it's a charade. It's a charade because we don't have an agreement whatsoever between the Parliament and the Council. We don't necessarily have expectation that this time won't be automatic. There is an assumption of automaticity. We already know that the European Popular Party is going to win. So it's going to be Ursula von der Leyen to get the endorsement, unless the European Council leaders might actually change their mind. And if you read the news, we all sense that actually the very same party, EPP, which is supposed to win, might not be endorsing Ursula von der Leyen. So this is going to be extremely damaging because we are creating an expectation that the lead candidate of the party getting most of the vote will be winning, but she won't, because last minute there will be somebody else. And I'm ready to make a bet that she won't get a second mandate. It's just impossible, given what is happening today. The very same political party endorsing her, it's not really endorsing her. And there are a lot of political scandals happening, the long outstanding issues between the Pfizer, the pharmaceutical company, and Ursula von der Leyen, basically negotiating the price of the vaccines that European taxpayers' money have been paying. A recent appointment of Mr. Pieper, MEP, as SME representative without any form of transparency. All these are pieces in the puzzle that are really questioning her appointment. But I want to see one more thing. This was not happen to occur because one of the idea that was proposed by von der Leyen in her speech at the European Parliament in 2019, which is a very difficult promise to make because it's not the European Commission making such a proposal, was that the new electoral law would have been reformed. But this is the job of the European Parliament, it's not the job of the Commission. But she made such a promise. That proposal was put forward in 20 and 21, and it was voted by a large majority by the European. And the European Parliament proposal was, for the first time, giving each of you 2 votes. So in June, if that electoral law would have been voted and then ratified by all our countries, each of you would have expressed 2 votes. 1 vote in the old way, representing, voting for your candidates in your region or your country, depending on the electoral law. If you come from France, candidates run all across the country. I think it's the same in the Netherlands. If you come from Italy, you vote for a candidate in your region. But the second vote would have been for a candidate running in a pan-European college. So that means that a German could have voted a Finnish candidate, a Finn would have been voting for a Slovenian candidate, and that's what we call transnationalist. So for the first time, we would have a combination between the Spitzenkandidaten process and the transnationalist. You would know that by voting Mr. Schmidt, you probably never heard of, but he's a Luxembourgish politician representing the socialists, so it's the new Franz Timmermans. You would have been combining him with a pool of candidates coming from all over, all representing and running on the same program. It would have been a game changer. And the original idea was to say we have 73 seats coming from the UK left, so we have 73 seats left in the European Parliament. We are going to be reallocating them through a pan-European college. This was downgraded to 26, 27 in the proposal, so basically 1 per member state with a lot of adjustments. Well, this proposal didn't even reach the European Council table. So they didn't discuss it, never, formally speaking. So there was no political appetite to go that way. However, things I think are changing a little bit. I'm moving to the second part, it's going to be just slightly shorter. So we can say that the role of citizens in the European integration process has been historically a marginal role, even when expressing their political preferences through casting their ballot box, as you can see. However, European integration, and in particular the socioeconomic integration, continues to occur. And it occurs also at qualitatively different level than in the past. If you think about the European reaction to migration or COVID or Russian invasion of Ukraine, led the average citizens to look at Europe not only as a troublemaker like in the past, an institution that is checking what our political leader governments can do or cannot do, but also as potentially a problem fixer, an entity that is the only one fit for purpose in addressing major transnational issues. And we could see the Next Generation EU, we could see the European Peace Facility, we could see many new forms of integration, we can call them, that are very at the limit of what European law allows by leveraging on provisions like Article 22 that have something formidable in common, because they allow emergency action, but they also set aside any form of democratic control. So basically, the parliament has no voice whatsoever. And this is clearly leading us to a new ballgame, because it's a ballgame in which Europe does much more, but is even less accountable to the average citizens, and there are not many mechanisms that allow us to somehow compensate for this. And I think this might also be argued is also testing or putting to test the very model of democracy in Europe, which is a model in which the legitimacy of European action, or what the European Union is doing today, is not only driven by representative democracy, our government sitting in the council and our MEPs sitting in the parliament, but it should also be driven by participation. And where is participation? Where is the space existing in between elections? What happens once on June 10th, we're going to have the new elected in Strasbourg and in Parliament? How can we engage with them? What are the opportunities to hold them accountable before waiting for 2029 and cast our ballot again? And here the good news is that the European Union provides a participatory toolbox, which is much richer than the one existing at the national level. There are many more opportunities for the average citizen to actually engage by submitting petitions to the European Parliament, by starting a European citizen initiatives that, as you probably know, allows 7 citizens coming from 7 European countries to actually propose or ask the European Union to act. You can actually ask for documents, meaning information coming from the European institution. You can actually lodge a complaint with the European Ombudsman if something goes wrong in your relationship between you and the European institutions. And you can, of course, also rely on the courts. And we see the courts being used strategically more and more by citizens. But overall, when you look at this empirically, and I don't want to bother you with the data, but I gather a lot of data. When you look at how these tools have been used diachronically, the petitions already existing at the time of the European call and steer community, so since the early days, they have been used very little. They are little known, little used. They require some literacy, which is not average literacy, is legal literacy in order to be used with purpose. But, and the message I have for you, when some of those tools have been used in the past, they actually made a difference. They made a difference in particular in setting the agenda of the European Union, in pushing the very same invisible European political parties to take those issues seriously. Example, international roaming charges, 2012, first European citizen initiatives ever started. It never collected 1 million signatures, but it was enough to get political momentum and to find political entrepreneurs, both in the Commission and in the Parliament, supporting this idea. It happened the same with an initiative by 2 German then students who asked for free Interrail. It generated 600 or 800,000 of free Interrail given around Europe. But it's not only about first world problems like the international roaming charges or issues of free movement in Europe. It's also about integrity. The fact that hundreds of thousands of citizens didn't really like the fact that the outgoing President of the European Commission decided to join Goldman Sachs to act as de facto lobbyist during the Brexit process. And this led to a major reform of the integrity rules, of the ethics rule, which did not prevent the Qatargate from happening, but still they clearly put the EU in a higher league. It led to major reforms when it comes to unpaid internship, an area where the EU has limited competences because we are at the interface between education and labor. And then a story that you probably know well from your colleague Vigilenza Abazzi, who has been working on this, which is whistleblowing protection, an issue nobody wanted to take, an issue in 2014, but the mobilization occurring both from academia and civil society push in 2014 all European political party leaders to say this is something we need to do because whistleblowing protection is a form of anti-corruption. If we protect the people who blow the whistles by denouncing wrongdoings happening in their own company or in the public service, we're going to make it happen. So you see all example of bottom-up initiatives that set the agenda for the political process and created accountability mechanisms that would not exist otherwise. Major form of transnational solidarity vis-a-vis women whose abortion rights were curtailed in Poland. Those also push the European Union to be much braver and courageous as compared to, for instance, the enforcement of the rule of law obligation. The same happened on LGBT space. The EU has been much more courageous with this. Instruments that are clearly taking off are climate litigation as an example of strategic litigation. So using the courts in a strategic way in order to fill the gaps that the political system is not able to actually deliver on. So you use the court as a strategic way to achieve the goals you cannot achieve in the political space. I'm not surprised that strategic litigation is starting off, and it might potentially thrive in Europe as a form of compensation for the lack of political accountability the European Union as a political system has. An example that I'd like to mention is this legal action that occurred only a few months ago, in which the European Association of Judges decided basically to replace the European Commission from acting as a guardian of the treaty. What happened when European law are breached by a European country? Well, in principle, the European Commission, being responsible for the very same rules it has been written down, it should go after those countries. But what happens if it doesn't? What happens if it is turning a blind eye to manifest violation? That's what happened when Poland, previous government, got approved its recovery plan under Next Generation EU. The judges of Europe said this is not acceptable. So the Association of Judges went before the European Court of Justice to challenge the Council, meaning the member states of the Union, to say, hey, look at what's happening here. Neither you nor the Commission are abiding by the rules. So we are going to go to the court. This case is pending and is absolutely fascinating. First of all, from an admissibility perspective, can Association of Judges get standing before the court? But more importantly, on substance, was the European Union, in that case, Council, allowed to actually approve this next generation installment, which was the recovery plan? Actually, was not this one, was the recovery plan itself before the first installment would be given, despite the fact the Polish government was in full breach of European law by not complying with previous judgment of the court and the whole milestone system, which is complicated. Very good news, this case has been assigned to the Grand Chamber, so it's very likely to be dismissed for being inadmissible, or if it will, there will be a very interesting discussions on why this case matters and what kind of decision can be made. In essence, I'm coming to an end. I've been speaking 3-4 minutes, a bit more than I expected, but my research question at the moment, which is a research question that I hopefully will enlighten some of your master theses or future work, is how Europe would look like if citizens had been engaging more with the process, administrative, judicial, political. What difference can citizens make in this story and in this project? And we don't really have an answer to that. We only have, I would say, quite anecdotal collection of stories where showing that when citizens take an initiative because the European political parties are simply not there, they're not ready, they don't feel that the time arrives, those issues all of a sudden come on top of their political agenda and they are reactive. This is true for issues we like, or most of we like, but it's also true for an issue like the agricultural protest today. We might think of unprecedented mobilization of the street rather than the law in order to capture the attention of the policymakers and to obtain easy concessions that would have not been able to obtain through the political process. So this Canadian pretty cliche call is really an invitation, an encouragement to think about the European integration process from the bottom up, thinking what would it happen if we reclaim many of the rights, many of the dynamics, which are enshrined in the treaty, but we never really claim or reclaim or own, how Europe would look like. My sense is that never before today, and this might be the major difference between 2024 and 2019 and 2014 and perhaps 2009, is that Europe is in listening mood. So there is the possibility to shape it more than in the past, while at the same time fearing the fact that if we're not going to be able to get out of this dynamic of unintelligibility, it will be even more complicated to own the European Union, because the next selection of top appointments might lead to forms of de-Europeanization in which the average European Commission is going to be accountable to their member states. This is something that should not happen. We all know that the European Commission, our executive, is made of individuals that, despite coming from one country, should act independently. Their job is to identify the European interest, which is not the sum of national interests, it's something different that they need to identify. But we already got a preview during this mandate, if you think about the Hungarian or the Polish commissioner, they were reporting back to the capitals. They were directed by the capitals in order to bring the national interest at the table. This is something that could come at yet another level. And the same might be true for the European Parliament. So I expect some form of de-Europeanization, some forms of paralysis of the legislative process when the new political priorities will be defined, which will inevitably be reflected at the European Parliament level. That basically means that the case for citizen-driven engagement or citizen mobilization might become even more important if we want to make sure that the system itself will remain responsive to the political preferences of the citizens. On this note, I'm going to stop and I turn back to you, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you very much.